Yeah, the book did make me feel really good about being human on that level, where it made us seem like these Swiss Army knives, where we show up and then we niche switch, we specialize. We have this like combination of generalists and specialists who then manage to overrun any habitat.
It's good news with a giant asterisk on it, right? The fact is, we are an incredibly special species, and we are adapted to something that no other species, species deal with it, but we are adapted to change. It's what we do. We bootstrap new software to deal with new problems, right? We're very good at it. And that does offer nothing but hope for the pickle we're in, because if any species was going to work, we created this problem, but we're also positioned really well to figure out how to get out of it. But it comes with a lot of other stuff. Selection has been pushing us in the direction of just simply getting our lineage's genes into the future at any cost. And so the point is, human beings are capable of all kinds of terrible stuff too. And the deepest message in the book may be that it is time for us to take evolution, the mindless process, out of the driver's seat, and to recognize our evolutionary purpose isn't interesting or honorable, but we are perfectly capable of defining a purpose that is worthy of us. And that's exactly what we should do at this moment in history.
It is my distinct pleasure and privilege to welcome to the Forward podcast Heather Heying and Bret Weinstein, the co-authors of this fabulous new book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here. Great to see you again.
Wonderful to be here.
Great to see you as well. So full disclosure, I have admired both Bret and Heather for quite some time, and I also hung out with Bret's brother, Eric, in the Bay Area over the last couple of years. So this is going to be something of a fawning interview. I guess you're all very used to that. So you're both evolutionary biology PhDs who managed to get a teaching appointment in the same place, which is next to impossible from what I know about academia. So did you meet while you were both getting your degrees at the University of Michigan?
Yeah, that so-called two-body problem in academia is very, very hard to break, isn't it? But we were lucky in that regard. We actually met each other in high school. We were friends in high school.
No.
Yep, I'm afraid so.
Yeah. What kind of nerdy high school was this? Where was this at?
It was in Santa Monica, California. It was a odd high school called Crossroads, which actually the campus is an alley with lots of repurposed buildings. So it's an eclectic school.
But this was not like a high school romance situation. Did you end up linking up later, or was it a high school romance situation?
I was in love with Heather from very early on, but no, we did not get together until college.
Yeah, we were friends for several years before we got together, and have been ever since.
And so you went to college together, and it sounds like Bret was crushing on you a bit, Heather. And then you started dating, and then you made a decision to go get your PhDs jointly.
We didn't go to college together. We left high school as friends, and at some point I
went to different coasts.
We went to different coasts, and I already knew how I felt about Heather, but at some point I got a marvelous letter, and we can elide the part about how I botched the response to the letter, but nonetheless, we did end up dropping out of school together, spending some time, and then going back to school together.
Wow. They should make a movie out of this romance. This sounds incredibly romantic and quite eventful, especially after reading your book, because it seems like it's easier to try and figure out where you haven't been as opposed to where you have been. Like anytime there's like a story in the book, it's like, I remember the time we were in Central America, Madagascar, like you name it. The book is amazing. I was excited to read it because the thesis is around how we are in modern circumstances that may or may not always be in keeping with some of our evolutionary tendencies or our own well-being. And you all dig into many areas in detail. How has the reception been? I get the sense that people have been very, very excited to talk to you both.
There's been extraordinary reception in some places and almost complete silence in others. Some of what I would have hoped for 20 years ago in terms of what reception to what turns out to have been a New York Times best-selling book hasn't existed at all. We haven't seen any talk in the mainstream outlets, but we're here talking to you. And we've talked to.
This is as mainstream as it gets, Heather.
This is as mainstream as it gets. I think we've reached far more audience than we would have if we had been excerpted in the Atlantic, for instance. But it hasn't followed any of the paths that one might have expected it to 10 years ago, but then isn't. And this is part of what you yourself talk about in your newest book. That is part of what modernity is showing us. That nothing that used to be the case seems to be the case anymore.
So. First of all, you joke, you're not the mainstream, but you hopefully are the headwaters. We are hoping to see that, a small trickle that emerges from somewhere and becomes a giant unstoppable force is the hope. But I would also say there's some analogy between what happened to our book and what happened to you in the presidential campaign. In fact, it would be fair to say
tell me more. Were you
we were Yang.
Were you called by another Asian man's name? No, I'm kidding.
Well, they did for a while put up pictures of random Asians in our place. No, what happened to us was the so-called mainstream, which as we know, is not the real mainstream, right? People have gotten so used to, being lied to that when they hear authentic stuff, they gravitate to it. And so the real mainstream is just sort of not officially acknowledged. And, from our perspective, this is what happened to you in the presidential campaign, right? You were the idea of, hey, an honest guy who wants to figure out what the best solutions are and isn't wedded to an ideology and isn't wedded to, some particular constituency. That was very appealing to lots of us. And so what needed to happen was you needed to be undermined. And they undermined you in every way, from cutting off your mic when you had things to say to putting up pictures of random Asian men and all of these. And so the point was, you didn't reflect in the mirror, right? And as Heather points out, our book sold out almost instantly. In fact, within 3 days of launch, it was no longer available. It was so popular. And yet, from the mainstream outlets, there was radio silence. And so the popularity of it was all driven by interviews on podcasts and word of mouth. And
it's effectively like the modern word of mouth, and that's what grassroots is. Maybe there's no comparable word for grassroots over in share this book space, but grassroots political campaign and grassroots share these ideas please is actually, they're analogous, and they're what we refer to in the book as campfire at some level. It's let's get together, let's exchange and expand on each other's ideas, and then disperse and find other campfires and seed the ideas there.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. And there are so many ideas in your book that would strike some as common sense. What I love is you both have such unassailable academic credentials, where you literally have 2 PhDs in evolutionary biology saying, hey, here's something about humankind. And look, it applies in other environments. And look, we're even going to throw in another species just to show that, that this is very much based in fact. So what handful of things do you think would lead someone in the mainstream to want to, for example, not talk about your your book? If you were to pick out a few ideas where you were like, oh, I think they had an issue with our talking about perhaps sex and gender in that way, or if there was another that sticks out in your own minds.
I don't think it works like that. I don't think it's that individuals arrive at the idea that they don't want to talk about the book. I think there is a general sense that there is a narrative. You ran into it in the presidential campaign. That narrative is feeble, and it is vulnerable to critique. And the problem for the mainstream is that evolutionary biology provides a toolkit that actually allows you to proceed from first principles and deduce what's taking place, and to say things about virtually any biological phenomenon, be it a pandemic or the climate policy and its effect on habitats, any of these things. It allows you to know how to walk into that question and begin to address it. And so if you're tending a feeble narrative, you don't want people with their own toolkit to say, hey, actually, what you just said doesn't make any sense. Here's the way you would actually approach that if you wanted to figure out what the best policy was. So, the more I hear us talking, the more I think what you ran into and what we ran into is the same thing, which is an instinctive sense that thing is not under control, and therefore it needs to just not even be acknowledged.
I guess I'll add that there's also a cartoon version of what an evolutionary approach to understanding humans is that immediately calls to mind things like eugenics and Nazis, right? Those people were doing Darwinism, and therefore anyone who's talking about Darwinism or evolutionary principles must be up to no good, must be crypto, racists or sexist or whatever it is. And that has become sort of mainstreamed in academia, especially in social sciences, wherein people who are sophisticated enough to understand that they have to acknowledge that evolution happens, of course, in terms of evolution of hearts and the structure of the brain. There's effectively a belief that once we're talking about human culture and consciousness, that's something else. That is explained by some other set of principles. And of course, that itself is a religious position, which such academics don't tend to acknowledge. But it becomes easy to say, oh, don't talk about, for instance, sex and gender, because we're doing that over here in this other space. You people, please stick to squid and baboons where you belong.
The Nazis thought they were doing Darwinism, but they weren't doing it well. And in some sense, if you look at our book and you read it carefully, what you find out is that the most major error that they made was that human specialness isn't housed in the genome, right? The genome is a platform on which human specialness is built. It is built above. It is literally epigenetic. Right. And so the idea of a creature that is so heavily software based that the normal way that selection proceeds in other creatures doesn't apply usefully if we're to figure out, why people succeed. So in essence, this was a very poor quality analysis on their part. And if you want to understand what a good quality analysis is, and the good news from that good quality analysis is human specialness is totally democratizable. And in fact, that's what we do automatically, right? We integrate our cultures, we borrow things from each other, and what we come up with is a software program that is better than we could come up with independently.
Yeah, let's figure out the best ideas and cultural norms across all societies and make them available to all.
This episode of the Forward Podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Is there anything preventing you from achieving your goals or interfering with your happiness? BetterHelp.com/Yang is a fantastic way to get your head on straight, in my opinion. BetterHelp can assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. So connect in a safe and private environment online. It's so convenient. I've been using it probably for the past 8 months. You can start communicating under 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not particularly self-help. It's just professional counseling done securely online. And you can communicate with your counselor anytime, whether that's text or email or video, phone. It's pretty awesome, convenient, and it's available worldwide. So whether you're looking to help you with depression or stress or anxiety, or relationships or sleeping or family conflicts, for me, it's about just letting off some steam and talking about the real things that happen in life. And now let's all be real. Since COVID, we've all been going through it. So I want you guys to check out BetterHelp and start living a happier life today. So as a listener to Forward Podcast, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at BetterHelp.com/Yang. So join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Yang.
Yeah, the book did make me feel really good about being human on that level, where it made us seem like these Swiss Army knives, where we show up and then we niche switch, we specialize. We have this like combination of generalists and specialists who then manage to overrun any habitat.
It's good news with a giant asterisk on it, right? The fact is, we are an incredibly special species, and we are adapted to something that no other species, species deal with it, but we are adapted to change. It's what we do. We bootstrap new software to deal with new problems, right? We're very good at it. And that does offer nothing but hope for the pickle we're in, because if any species was going to work, we created this problem, but we're also positioned really well to figure out how to get out of it. But it comes with a lot of other stuff. Selection has been pushing us in the direction of just simply getting our lineage's genes into the future at any cost. And so the point is, human beings are capable of all kinds of terrible stuff too. And the deepest message in the book may be that it is time for us to take evolution, the mindless process, out of the driver's seat, and to recognize our evolutionary purpose isn't interesting or honorable, but we are perfectly capable of defining a purpose that is worthy of us. And that's exactly what we should do at this moment in history.
Yeah, that was the conclusion of the book, which was really profound in talking about the fourth frontier, which is something that a lot of people, I think, would agree with, that we're collision course with disaster species-wide, that this growth imperative will eventually make no sense. It did put me in mind of Jared Diamond's book Collapse from a while ago, which I'm sure you both read when it came out. It's consistent with what a lot of people think in terms of the sustainability of the environment, where if you have companies that have a growth imperative, then eventually, and societies, you point out that our population is now at 7 billion, which, by the way, when we were all growing up, what was the world's population?
Well, it depends how early you go, but I recall it crossing into above 7 in our adult lifespans.
Well, because I ask because I remember as a kid when I learned how many people were on Earth, I think it was either 2 or 3 billion. And so as a person, that number stuck in my head. And then when someone told me it was 7 billion later, I was like, when did it become 7 billion? So I want someone to take a look at whether or not I'm misremembering as a kid as to like.
I don't think you are. I remember thinking about this about my grandfather's lifespan. My grandfather was born in 1913, and the world population doubled twice while he was on Earth, which is a staggering fact.
Yeah.
Right.
And we point out in the book that our desire for growth is not unusual. And that's just like the goal being to reproduce yourself into the future as far as possible is not unusual. It's also not honorable. So how do we harness that desire, understand the desire both for a personal sense of growth and sort of a societal sense of growth and abundance, and there's always more around the next corner, and turn it into something that has the sense of growth without actually requiring the use of more resources, because we can't keep doing that.
Yeah, so we're going to come back to what we're going to do species-wide, but I want to explore some of the key ideas in the book, and there's so many. You talk about medicine, food, sleep, parenthood, relationships. So you could do a podcast about really any one of these. But I was trying to distill some of the key points. And one of the things that stuck with me is a story about Brett breaking his wrist and then having what sounds like a nightmarish couple of days, like where it's like excruciating pain, and then you end up taking another trip with it, and talk about how after a lot of hardship, eventually it healed, and it healed well, but that 95% of people would have immobilized it, cast it, maybe taken some pharmaceutical painkillers and done a bunch of other things that address one aspect of the injury, either the bone or the pain, but don't necessarily address the entire thing in terms of soft tissue recovery or usability or any of those things. And I thought that story, one, it sticks with you because, no one wants to be going for days with a broken wrist without drugs, in my opinion. I mean, I like to think that I'd do the same thing you did, but who the heck knows? But there was something where that principle applied many times throughout the book, where that you're trying to home in on one particular bad thing you're getting rid of. And then in the process of getting rid of that bad thing, you end up having unintended effects elsewhere.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And with regard to that particular story, there's at least two things at play. We've got the fact that human bodies and brains are actually anti-fragile, right? We actually become stronger with use, with insult, even, to a point. There are certainly insults and injuries beyond which we cannot recover, beyond which we cannot repair. But the response to immobilize all kinds of injuries, which actually would not only withstand, but actually repair more quickly if they were able to continue to be used, is an aspect of modern medicine that we argue is an error because it's employed as a hard and fast rule. When you break something, you immobilize it, as opposed to what kind of break is it? Does this one warrant that kind of immobilization? And if so, for how long, et cetera. And then there's also just the tendency to reduce our experiences to single parts of what they are. I'm feeling pain. Pain doesn't feel good, therefore I must get rid of it. Instead of recognizing that pain is an adaptive response, which we should consider, what is it that the pain is telling me? What might it be that I am doing that I can reduce such that the pain goes away, so that I can use the pain as an indicator of whether or not my behavior is helping me or harming me, as opposed to get rid of the pain so that I can continue on with, frankly, whatever I might be doing that's causing me to be in pain.
So I would just add the incident. I broke my wrist. I fell off a hoverboard that our younger son.
Those things are death traps, by the way. No, I'm kidding.
Those things are. No, I'm a big fan of the electric unicycle, but I would agree with you. The hoverboard is a death trap, both in terms of its battery and also its control mechanism. But anyway, I fell off one as I was getting on it for the first time, and I felt my wrist crack. I knew what had happened. And the thing is, I had harbored the following belief for, I don't know, since I first learned about biology in high school, which is we are a kind of creature that has limbs that can repair from a break, because many of our ancestors had breaks, recovered, had offspring after that, right? Not every creature is like that. A horse is famously difficult to repair a broken limb because a horse's ancestors, if they broke a limb, very quickly got eaten by predators. And so there's no selective force to build the repair machinery. So my feeling was, okay, I'm a creature that knows how to repair its own limbs. Why is the instinct to go to a doctor who then immobilizes and does something that is a novel intervention? Surely nature has a program for what to do. Now, one caveat. I made very sure that what I had was a fracture in which nothing was misaligned. There was no indication that I had broken all the way through, right? It was a crack. And I learned my lesson, right? I started immediately utilizing it just a little, right? That was the thing that got me in so much pain that first night, was that I used it too much. I was not super cautious with it right away. But it wasn't even weeks before I was way better off, right? It was a few days before I had some use of my limb, and then it quickly got better. And, it very much reflected my hypothesis that there's a built-in program, and it probably beats the heck out of a cast if your break is sufficiently minor.
And we do also, as you know, tell the story in the book of our oldest son breaking his arm when he was very young. And it was such a remarkable break that he needed surgical intervention. And, without modern surgical capacity, he would be deformed now. His arm would have stopped growing, and he would be very asymmetric and have much lower functionality absent that capacity. So this, again, there are no set and forget rubrics here, and that also is one of the messages of evolutionary thinking, is that it actually is clarifying and simplifying, but you do have to carry around with you an expectation that whatever happens, okay, I'm going to have to think this through just a little bit. from first principles to see what I should do next, as opposed to it's a break, cast it. That's too simple a rubric.
Yeah, and in fact, in our older son Zach's case, when he broke his arm, it also points to the central theme in our book, which is about novelty and what it can do to you. In fact, our point is that we are in a stage of hyper novelty, right? Novelty humans deal with well. Hyper novelty no creature deals with. And our older son, when he broke his arm in this spectacular way, it was the combination of a couple of mundane novel factors: a small set of stairs and a hippity hop, neither of which have any analogy in the ancestral environment. And the combination of them resulted in a child doing something that would have been a rarity for an ancestor, right? The forces were just too great, and the break was beyond what normal repair would handle.
Now, I'm going to give you some insight into my marriage for a moment. So I grew up the son of immigrants, and my father was the type of person who wouldn't see doctors or medical professionals very much. And I am the sort of person who tends to just wait for myself to get better. I don't really take drugs or medicine. I don't even have right now. This is going to sound terrible, but like I don't even know who my primary care physician is. Like I would need to go get one. My wife, on the other hand, likes to treat. So if I'm under the weather, she'll just like throw a bunch of things in front of me, pills, digestibles, whatever they are. And sometimes I just take them because, I don't care enough to have any conflict over it. I'm just like, I assume, she's done some research and homework. There's some middle ground, I'd imagine, where one aspect of our different approach to parenting was when our son was diagnosed as autistic, our older son, where she would say, hey, I think we should have, him evaluated or whatnot. And I was always like, he's fine. I kind of had that attitude. And then when she did get him diagnosed, I was like, oh, yeah, you were right. I don't know if this is a customary dynamic between parents. So I'm sharing this in part because I imagine there are people listening to this who might resemble one or the other, where they might be someone who just ignores things. I tend to fall in that camp, honestly. Or they fall into a camp where they try and get a remedy for everything. You're suggesting that there's probably a better process than either of those.
That's an amazing characterization that you just provided, and I suspect that dynamic is somewhat common in relationships, honestly, and that it probably, to the degree that it exists, often falls along those gender lines. That men are more likely to assume that they can take care of it themselves with whatever they've got on board already, and women are more likely to look to the community, the outside authorities, right, to find the wisdom and bring that in. Both of which approaches are valid and valuable, although the second one is more easily gamed in a global culture in which the authorities aren't your friends and the wise women with whom you share, coffee, but actually, anonymous, often corporate entities. So I guess I would say that the third way, if you will, which is I think what we are suggesting in the book, is to consider what this thing is that you have experienced, and how out of step with the millions, tens of millions, depending on how far back you want to go, billions of years of evolution that has led you to this point, is your current experience, and what are the chances that it was hyper novelty that got you into this, and therefore a relatively hyper novel solution that you will need to get you out of it? Or can the tools that you already have on board, or a change in behavior, for instance, affect you well enough to get you out of the current mess that you're in, whatever it is?
I would point out, though, Heather hints at this when she talks about the difference between our environment and the ancestral environment. In the ancestral environment, you would be wise to take advantage of the advice offered, especially by people in your lineage who had specialized in figuring out what to do. It is possible that some of what they would offer you would be of little medical value, right? But it is unlikely that long-standing medical traditions, even extremely primitive ones, would be harmful to you, right? In other words, there is a selective process that results in the accumulation of wisdom about what to do about this and that sort of thing. And in fact, pharmaceutical companies have spotted this, and they have done a bunch of globetrotting looking for compounds in the forests of the world that are being successfully used, that they can borrow and shout eureka over. We don't live in a world where your instinct about how safe things are is any good. And it is nowhere worse than when it comes to modern medicine. Iatrogenic harm is incredibly common. Things that we thought were safe, like Benadryl, Tylenol, it turns out there's a long history of knowing it's not safe that the public is largely unaware of. But, Benadryl, Seldane, erythromycin, all of these things, every NSAID turns out to have significant harms. In some of these cases, your doctor probably isn't even aware. If you ask your doctor about heart damage from erythromycin, they're probably unaware that it does it, right? Nobody warns you about this with Advil. And so the problem, Andrew, is that there is no wise place to stand that allows you to mitigate harm here. We are constantly in a choice between failure modes. Do I go to the doctor and have my doctor tell me what they always tell me? Oh, here, take this pill. Is it safe? Oh, it's very safe. Really? I know you don't know that, because I know how many drugs have turned out not to be safe after decades, right?
One of the things I campaigned on was alternative medicines, because I just instinctively admired and respected them. And one other thing that happens in my household is that if my elderly Chinese mom is around, she'll just throw some herbal remedy in front of me, and then I will take it without thinking twice about it because I just think to myself, well, I'm very confident this isn't going to harm me. Like, it's probably going to help me. So let me just do that. Like that is something that I've just internalized naturally.
And that is, we would argue, effectively an evolutionary perspective that you've onboarded without necessarily knowing that is what it was. Your elderly Chinese mother is bringing with her the wisdom of generations, of millennia, right, in this case. And because of that, you can be very confident that it's not going to hurt you. It's possible that it won't help, but it's unlikely to do harm. It seems, there are stories about whatever it is having helped in the past. And maybe some of those stories are actually about, being, the preparation and the presence to the loved one who is caring for you, and that you need, your body needs to know that it's protected for some number of hours when it doesn't have to be worried at all about, risks from outside. Maybe it's not actually about the botanicals or the fungal medicine itself, or maybe it is. I'm sure
maybe
there are
it
cases in both of those camps.
Oh yeah, I've been taking those herbal remedies since I was a kid, and they certainly don't hurt. And a lot of the times, it seems like they helped.
You know what makes them work even better? If you chase them with chicken soup.
Agree.
You just
that happened a lot. I'd have the remedy and then some chicken soup.
It definitely it's a kind of a bringing together of two medical traditions, and it has a synergistic effect.
So there's another idea in the book that you used in different contexts that I loved, is Chesterton's gate, where someone shows up and it's like, hey, there's this gate, we don't know what it's doing here, let's get rid of it. And then someone says, well, we can't get rid of it until you find out what it's doing here.
Right. You'll know when you know why they installed it, whether or not it's time to take it out.
Yeah, you don't wait to see what goes wrong after getting rid of something to decide, maybe we shouldn't have taken that thing out at all.
Yeah,
and so, right, we talk about, then we apply that to like Chesterton's organs, Chesterton's breast milk, Chesterton's religions even, right? Look at all of the things that humans have been living with. Chesterton's ancestral medicines, right? We don't simply throw these out because there's some new thing on the block, new kid on the block. And actually, I know you're going to say something here, but I'm thinking about, this is in the Western tradition rather than the Chinese medicine tradition, but early in the 20th century, there was a movement among doctors to treat things like tuberculosis with what was being called heliotherapy, which just means get out in the sun, right? Like get out in the sun and get your
Good old heliotherapy.
literal
I'm on board.
right? And also open air therapy, which these do not sound high tech because they're not. But you'd throw open the windows to wards. You'd actually roll patients out if they were not ambulatory out into the sun where the air was blowing and the sun was shining. And we still don't know all of the mechanisms by which this works, but it does work. Into this environment came one of the most amazing successes of Western medicine, which is antibiotics, widespread antibiotics. And instead of using antibiotics on top of these existing low-tech, incredibly effective treatments of heliotherapy and open-air therapy, what happened was, in an effort to control things, to make things constrained, to make things easy to track, we moved patients inside, we made windows unopenable, we made rooms tiny, all of which is going to increase the risk of at least respiratory infections. And we just started treating with the new instead of adding it to the old. Why would we ever do that? Why would we get rid of the old when it's working, when something new shows up? We should be adding rather than replacing.
They didn't even wash down the antibiotics with chicken soup. Sorry.
Yeah. Get that person some sunshine, some chicken soup, and some Chinese herbal remedies.
At least you're not going to hurt them. And it turns out all of these things have reasons behind them. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, not at all. Another thing from the book where you pointed out exercise tends to reduce depression and anxiety. It's like, maybe we should be prescribing that. I was like, oh my gosh, they're right. Or, going outside on the regular tends to make you feel better, which I find, I think everyone finds it, that any kind of exposure to the sun and nature will help your mental health, at least in some measure.
I think you need to be careful here, Andrew. It sounds to me like you're lazy shaming.
Well, maybe I'm indoor shaming.
Are you indoor shaming?
Brett, I mean,
you're shut-in shaming. I don't know what you're doing, Andrew.
I'm shut-in shaming.
I'm sure it's immoral.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think we write this into the book, but even just shooting to get outside into the sun for a few minutes early in the day, when we also know that getting direct exposure to sun early in the day helps with, believe it or not, sleep patterns, right? Not only does it help with depression and anxiety, and obviously, and reduces your risk of infection from certain things, but it actually just getting that shift light, that, the blue shift light that is reflective of the morning sun into your brain earlier, direct into your eyes, the earlier in the day possible, the more likely you are to be able to fall asleep easily at night and sleep well. And this is something that, as far as I can tell, almost no one, if anyone, was talking about 30, 40 years ago. But 30, 40 years ago already, people were having a ton of sleep problems. And what was associated with that? Electric lights at night, no thinking about what the spectrum was that they were on, increasingly the use of pharmaceuticals to help you get to sleep, and alarm clocks that blast you awake at a certain time every morning, regardless of where you are in your sleep cycle. None of this is conducive to actually getting into a rhythm with your own sleep cycle.
And in fact, I don't know enough about the history to say, but there is something interesting about the fact that what we've done is used coffee as a substitute for the built-in system we have for regularizing your pattern of mental activity and inactivity. And, coffee is something you can sell, right? It's hard to make money on sunlight. And,
if you could, that'd be a great business. The sun tax.
Well, all right. Can you edit that out?
Startup idea.
We'll spitball and see if we can find a business model in here. But
no. What it starts out with the sun shade. We do the Mr. Burns and we block the sun, and then we're like, if you want any sunlight, got to pay the tax.
Wait a minute.
Genius.
Is that what this lockdown stuff is? Are they going to sell us sunlight? Andrew, I think you may have figured it out.
Mr. Burns might have gotten in there. Yeah, this is for the Simpsons movie from a while back.
Have you thought about certain friends and family members and what you're going to get them for the holidays this year? Well, we have a gift idea for you, and that's Hello Tushy Bidets, because they are eco-friendly, they're a little techy, and they're actually affordable and super unique. It ticks all the boxes. So you can get Tushy Bidets is a great gift for your eco-conscious cousin, your neat freak sister, your whoever you want in your family that might find this awesome, funny, or eco-friendly. It cuts your toilet paper use down by 80%, and they're pretty awesome. So look, they wash your bum with fresh water, and a better way to clean than toilet paper. It's simple spray and pat dry. It attaches to your existing toilet, so no plumber or electrician needed. Super easy. You can get it done in like less than 8 minutes. Pretty awesome. And it cuts down your toilet paper use and budget by 80%. So saving money and preventing yourself from excess waste. So join millions of Hello Tushy happy customers right now who take care of their Yule. This is the quote. They take care of their Yule logs the dignified way. That's ridiculous, but still hilarious. So here's the deal. Give the gift of a clean bum to yourself or your loved ones this holiday season and get 10% off plus free shipping right now at hellotushy.com/yang. That's hellotushy.com/yang for 10% off and free shipping. Do it right now.
You know what? One thing this conversation has reminded me of, and this, I think you'll agree with this. I was running for mayor of New York City, and I was brought into yeshiva schools and Catholic schools, and I saw these kids who were learning in these environments. And then I was questioned about religious schooling, and I was very supportive of religious schooling because I said, look, they're serving these kids, and if there are individual issues, like it should be taken very much in the context of people who are educating their kids and like working hard in a particular way that is working with their community. And I got freaking lambasted for this in a way that really I found it kind of surprising. I think that one of the things I'm sort of suggesting is that I'm not sure what it is, but I think I naturally tend towards like a degree of deference to wisdom that's been built up over a long period of time, and a degree of skepticism towards what you'd consider like a modern rubric where someone's like, oh, this is the way you do it. This is the way you do it. And if you don't do this, then you're like screwing it up. And it's like, well, how long have you been at this? And, they've been at this for a very long time. And like, are there actual, is it such that applying these modern standards is like working 99.9% of the time, whatever, like all this, because like they're anyway. So this is what it reminded me of, because I was shocked at the level of energy around critiques of like different approaches, at least to people were very passionate about on the schooling side.
There's a very narrow focus, I think, among the so-called elites, the educated coastal class of which we are all members. On religion, we're past that, right? Like many people imagine that is a sign of sophistication to recognize that they are beyond that. And finding value in traditions, regardless of how you feel about the sort of the central metaphor of a god, is somehow suspect. And you've seen this, as you just described, and we've certainly seen this as evolutionary biologists who don't have faith ourselves, but are have found so much value not only in these traditions, but also in so many people who do have faith. That is not antithetical to an evolutionary understanding of the world. And frankly, I think the simple rubric that many of the liberal elites have with regard to if religion then bad is obscuring far more untruths in many of the modern ideology that they are somehow blinded to.
Yeah, I would say the problem is we're not comparing it to the proper thing. Religious schooling is often done well. It is very easy to do badly, right? And it has been used. I think what you got as pushback is, to the extent that it's honorable pushback, it is trauma from having seen religion as an excuse to misinform children about things that are really the basis of our collective understanding of the universe, and therefore the basis of sound policy. How are we to govern ourselves? It's one thing if a god gave us a disposable planet and said use it up because it's not the ultimate point of this. It's another thing if we recognize actually we're the stewards of the most interesting rock in the known universe and we are not allowed to destroy it. right? We owe it to future generations to leave it here. So you can see religious schooling can be an opt-out for things that are essential. That is often not what it is, and it does have this break. And the comparison, to me, the schooling that is non-religious these days, shockingly, almost across the board, looks effectively like a cult. That is to say, it's a religion without having passed the test of time. And that is very frightening. So many of the things that are being dispensed in these modern secular schools, including public schools, does not pass a scientific test either. And so if you compare those two things to each other, which error would I prefer? A kind of, metaphorical grounding that causes the teaching not to be as modern as it might be, or a grab bag of assertions, many of them cynical, designed to advance an ideology. I prefer the former. Now, the problem, and what we argue in the book, is that we are stuck in this pickle, not just with schooling, but with everything. There is, in general, nowhere to go back to. There is no diet. There is no way of educating. There's no nothing.
I feel for you because you were such, it seemed from reading your book, you seem like you were such hands-on, diligent parents. Where, like when you say there's like no place to go back to, because as a parent, you do feel sort of stuck. You're like, okay, like which boat am I going to go with?
Yeah, very much so. If I can just add in before we pivot in the way I think you're going, I want to say I think there's a category error in people's heads that explains partially, the response that you got, Andrew, to being accepting and embracing of religious schools, and the response that we've gotten too, which is that religious school isn't a thing. Yeshivas and Jesuit academies are not the same as Jesus Camp. And that's not to say that there aren't even some, evangelical experiences that may be worthwhile, but that is the thing that most of us have in our heads, I think, at least among the sort of the liberal intellectual class when we hear religious school. That that's those are the people who take their kids out of school so they never hear any talk of evolution. And that that does seem like
that's not that they I guess maybe I'm in circles where that's not what I think of either.
But yeshivas, Jesuit schools, Episcopal schools, there are a lot of ways to teach with a founding in religion that's extraordinary.
The problem, and it is the central theme of the book, is that we are in effect across the board, whether it's gender or schooling or the way we govern ourselves or any of these things, forced to architect something new. And in general, it is not something that if you simply know, you can describe it, right? You can't blueprint these things. You have to navigate to them. You have to prototype and go in the right direction, which means you have to agree what the purpose of the exercise is, so you know whether your prototype was better or worse than the last one. And this is a tough message because most people are what we would call verificationists. Maybe we're all born verificationists, where we look for evidence that supports our perspective.
Yeah.
The scientific worldview requires you to do the opposite. You have to look at the things that suggest you don't have it right. And so if you go through our book and you're a conservative, you'll find right. It is hard. It's unnatural and it's painful.
It's irritating too, because you're constantly having to reassess and change your mind.
But it makes your model get better over time. It is the key to making your model anti-fragile. And so if you do that, if you're a verificationist and you go through our book, if you're a conservative, you'll say, oh, they're conservatives, right? If you're if you're a liberal and you go through it, you'll think, actually, these people are radicals, right? They're talking about a total revamp, right?
You end up with a very, very radical seeming conclusion, which we'll return to.
Right.
Continue.
And the point is, they're both there, right? We're arguing for something extremely radical, and we're arguing that we have to listen to the conservatives as we prototype this thing, because if not, the liberal failure mode is gonna kick in like we've never seen before, and we're gonna have nothing but unintended consequences from sea to shining sea. So that's the message. We have to navigate anew, which requires us to understand what conservatives have right and what they don't.
You should start a political movement, my friends. Well, one idea I also wanted to affirm from the book that I loved so much, which was that like a myth can be false but useful. I thought that was so powerful. And you use an example where all farmers are told to plant their crops during the full moon because it's good for their crops, which doesn't make any sense. but because, it changes all the time. But it turns out them all planting their crops at the full moon makes them collectively more successful because predators aren't able to come eat the crops at the, because everyone's planting at the same time. So like the damage will be less. And so if you were a modern, you showed up and you'd be like, this is the dumbest suggestion in the world. If you didn't understand that there was an underlying purpose.
Yeah. So, I mean, the phrase we use is literally false, metaphorically true. And we come in with our modern visions and we listen to the words that people say. And we think that the words that people say, the cover story basically, is the whole thing. And of course it's not. And so just exactly as you just said, the moon is effectively a giant sky calendar that everyone can see, that is the same for everyone. And so, fine, put aside, if you will, that the moon itself or the gods that drive it care about when it is that you, the individual farmers, are planting, and recognize that having this belief in everyone's heads across a region allows for synchronization of both planting and harvesting, and that reduces crop loss because it synchronizes not just the farmers and therefore their crops, but also the crop predators.
Yeah, in fact, it's a very beautiful story because religious people, who I in general get along with very easily, hate it when I say this, but the moon and actually our entire solar system cannot have been the creation of a loving God or gods because nothing's an integer. And so it befuddles every attempt to figure out how many days there are in a year. Hey, not even an integer. No wonder culture after culture has thought they had the number, and then they've watched their calendar march so that the planting moment
was off over time.
Right.
Maybe they're the creation of a trickster god. Right?
Well, that's plausible that it's a trickster god could do this, right, just to mess you up. But the basic point is, even in such a circumstance, ancient wisdom is actually the result of a process that discovers an elegant solution even when you can't write it out, right? The discovery of how long the year is a very new discovery. The fact that the moon phase isn't regular with respect to the seasons because we don't have an integer there either. Still, the point is, all you need to do is get everybody to agree on what day to do it. That's where the benefit comes from. That day can move within a month, but the point is everybody can see the moon and we can all agree when it's full. That's good enough.
Why are you giving big tech companies rights and access to your data with no consequence? It's ridiculous. You've got, frankly, every time you go online, there are companies that are taking your location, browser history, you name it, and using that to make money off of you. And so to prevent them from doing that, Andrew and I both use ExpressVPN, and it's awesome. You download the ExpressVPN app. You can get it on your phone, get it on your tablet, get it on your laptop. I have it on my laptop. You press a button and you have your very, very own virtual private network where big tech companies, nobody can have access to where you are, what data are you using, and hides your IP address that makes you actively more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. What's more, ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And what I like most is how freaking easy it is to use. It's one click. It's so easy. It was rated #1 by Business Insider and a bunch of other places. So let's stop allowing big tech to revoke our rights to free speech. Why not revoke their right to your data instead? Secure your internet with VPN that we trust for online protection. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's EXPRESSVPN.com/yang to get 3 extra months free with our exclusive link for the Forward Podcast listeners. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now.
So when I talked about you both starting a political movement, Brett, it seemed like you were about to say something, which excites me. One of the things that I've been going through a particular progression or evolution myself, and I've become convinced of a couple of things. There's this narrow band of media organizations that are talking to ourselves and each other while like the rest of the country is looking around, just getting more and more restive and agitated and more mistrustful and the rest of it. And I personally am not content with hanging out on like in like the corporate layer, talking to like a shrinking group. Like I want to go to where the people actually are, and to where the frankly the country is either going to be won or lost. And my campaign, it sounds like your book and my campaign are similar in that I just went around to the campfires. I see the power of the campfires. Right now, I'm interested in trying to make them more powerful still, maybe even getting resources to them because they are reaching as many or more people than the media outlets that, for whatever reason, people still see as authoritative in these dimensions. So this is some of the stuff that I've been weighing and figuring out how we can make use of, because I can sense that the narrative you speak of is it's less and less trusted, and it's less and less worthy of being trusted, frankly. Like I'm not sure when that worm turned, but it certainly it did at some point. So what are your thoughts on trying to build what in my mind would be a very difficult to frame political movement, because you're trying to get people on board with a vision while saying, look, I'm not going to be dictating like, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z. It's more like we need some principles in mind and then head towards a destination.
Well, first thing to say is I think starting a political movement is a terrible idea. I think starting a non-political movement is a great idea. It's essential, and this is the moment. And you're a pioneer in this landscape, and I know we applaud what you're doing. If I can be candid, I think you're headed for a brick wall. And in some sense, this won't be the first time you've run into one. And I do think maybe there's the anti-fragile story of Andrew Yang is unfolding in front of us. But in order to do what you're doing, you're going to have to defeat the paradox of the lesser evil, right? This is going to be used to thrash your movement to shreds at the point that we have an election, because fill in the blank is going to be an evil that requires us to vote for whatever garbage the DNC wants to feed us, right? I mean, that's just the structure of the thing. And if you don't have an answer to why we cannot listen to that there may be hazards associated with fill in the blank, but those hazards are an argument for doing this now, because those hazards only get worse over time. So you will remember during the last election, the Unity 2020 proposal was constructed specifically to defeat that problem, so that you couldn't say, hey, we can't do this now because you'll elect fill in the blank, right? In that case, it was Trump. Because
it may be Trump again, but continue.
Well, let's put it this way. If it's Trump again, then this is the only question, because so many people have this sort of PTSD that causes them to vote for whatever garbage the DNC feeds them, because don't forget, right? The greater evil wasn't always Trump, right? It was Mitt Romney, right? It was George W. Bush, right? And these are people that we became nostalgic for during the Trump era. So the point is, this is a structure, a game theoretic structure designed exactly to prevent you from doing what you're doing. And you got to beat it structurally in order to succeed. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is, look,
we'll describe the structure that you proposed. So the Unity 2020.
Yeah, the Unity 2020 structure, which some of your audience will remember, was that we effectively nominate a team, somebody from the left, somebody from the right. Right? These would be courageous, insightful patriots, right? And in fact, your name was our first proposal for somebody from the left. And the idea is that they would agree to run as a team, right? You don't have to alter the Constitution to do this. One of them would run at the top of the ticket. The person who runs at the top of the ticket is chosen by a coin flip. They would govern by consensus, and only in the rare instances, hopefully never instances, in which they couldn't reach agreement on what the best policy was, would the person at the top of the ticket make the call. And then 4 years in, the roles would reverse, and they would run with the former president running as vice president. And the point was, this neutralizes the lesser evil because it doesn't borrow. Everybody knows that their interests are represented in the room. And so it doesn't actually borrow from one side and risk electing the other. And we saw in our internal polling data that actually the people who volunteered to work with us were very evenly divided. So this structure actually worked. So
between partisan, like divided between sides of the aisle.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So the point was, it didn't actually spoil the election. And we also built in a fail-safe, and we said, look, if this is not, if this thing doesn't catalyze to the point that it's a plausible contender, we'll pull the plug on it, which we did. Right. So we were good to our word. But anyway, that's all beside the point. You need some structure to beat the lesser evil paradox, or they're going to use it to destroy you. And look, you're doing the work. We would be happy to, we are fellow travelers, clearly. We want good governance, and we'd love to figure out what good governance is, and we're all open to listening to what the evidence suggests and all of that. I am concerned that we are watching a very rapid progression to some new landscape that none of us have been in. And that
I agree. I think it's actually the most likely scenario right now. And if you play out the next several years, Republicans take the House next year, maybe the Senate. Very hard to have a Democratic victory policy-wise if Republicans have either one house or both. You roll into 24. Trump is the Republican nominee. Democrats don't know what to do. They run Joe Biden again. And then you have, in all probability, a Trump victory, or if not a Trump victory, a Trump close call that he will claim victory. And in either scenario, you wind up with chaos and violence on the streets, and possibly an autocrat, and a population that at this point has been so disgusted and disenchanted that they just kind of slump into the end of democracy. I think this is a pretty realistic scenario.
Well, slump into the end of democracy is an unfortunately very apt vision, I think.
What is it? Slouching towards Bethlehem?
Yeah, slump into the end of democracy.
So I will point out that there was a structural solution to this too. As this was all unfolding, I advocated for convict Trump, pardon him, and pardon anybody who was nonviolent in either the insurrection at the Capitol or the BLM riots, and neutralize this, right? Provide us a structure in which these things aren't the charged elements that control our next electoral cycle, so that we can actually figure out what to do and how to govern ourselves.
And begin to talk about what it is that drove people into the streets for the entire summer of 2020 in Portland, rioting, and into the Capitol on January 6th. There, at base, there were a small number of violent bad actors, but there were a lot of people who were actually acting from passion and disenfranchisement.
Yeah, misguided people. I think the overall arching message is, look, you've started something. We're enthusiastic to see it. We'd love to help you think through how to avoid the pitfalls. We've also started something. Maybe they're the same something. I don't know. But let's put it this way. Every smart person we know is looking for the way out of a political death spiral that is threatening every ounce of what made the West special. And it isn't just the U.S., right? We may need to lead the West out of this if we can figure out which way's up again. But nonetheless, the West is in jeopardy. This can't be allowed to unfold because, in effect, it's the Chesterton's fence problem, right? Mm-hmm. People don't understand. As much as there's terrible, frustrating stuff in our system in desperate need of fixing, and it has needed fixing for decades, they don't see the part that works beautifully because it just works. And to upend it, we are toying with being in a far worse, far less fair, far less dynamic and productive world just simply by throwing out the stuff that we don't realize is actually, yes, it's the well-being of the West is not fairly distributed. That is absolutely true. But the West is very productive, right? You don't want to throw out the productivity. You want to figure out how to make the system fair. That's the point.
And it's not like the inequities are going to get better under an autocrat or whatnot. You know, I mean, like
we know they'll get worse.
Right. The West has been capable of being productive, but in a real way, like in a, generating the creative and analytical and healing and communicative, whatever it is that individuals have passions and skills for. The West's ways of approaching people and opportunity has allowed more people access to all of those things to be their best selves. And one of the things that I've been saying for decades, and we sort of approach it in the book, is for all of those who would argue that the West is the worst place on the planet, that that we are doing things far worse than anywhere else. It's very hard to do right now because of COVID and the public policy surrounding it, but go somewhere else, like travel somewhere that isn't a Disney-fied version of your home, and actually be there and hang out in the town square or in the bar or whatever, regardless.
My last podcast guest said the same thing, where she was in the south of India and was like, I love this country, and anyone who doesn't think it's great should also go take a bus in the south of India. And you've been on many of those buses. I instinctively love this country in part because my family immigrated here, and my brother and I have had the kind of lives that our grandparents or our parents could only have dreamed of.
I mean, my lineage has gotten awfully used to fleeing for our lives, and the fact is, America has been a great place for my persecuted relatives, right? It's been a very fair place. Has it been perfectly fair? No, right? And we are liberals, right? We are very interested in seeing the degree to which the system is systematically unfair. Of course we want to see that fixed. That's the whole point of the project, right? But to toy with the inverse, right? With making it desperately unfair in some direction that at the moment seems reasonable to somebody is just, it is the height of insanity. And
one of the problems really for all of us, but for educators especially, is to figure out how to not teach caricatures of the past where we can all see with the hindsight of 50 or 100 or 1,000 years what mistakes looked like and how they sent populations into totalitarianism. And no one imagines that they would recognize that when it was happening to them in the present, it wouldn't feel the way they've been taught it looked in retrospect. So how can we actively reflect and encourage everyone to actively reflect on what do those early things look like? And if we can't, then we will, as you say, slump into the end of democracy. Like that will happen.
Well, you point out this hazard at the end of your book as one of the dangers when you advocate for trying to open up the fourth frontier and get away from the growth for growth's sake mindset that will lead us to catastrophe over time. I did want to end asking about how we can get there. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It was a radical proposal. I really liked the way your book built up to it, where it stood to reason by the end. They're like, oh yeah, that's right. If we do our reductionist growth approach, it is going to end up being calamitous for everyone. And so what do you imagine in addition to, obviously, I think everyone should read this book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, and think deeply about how we can shift gears. What is the best approach in your minds to try to activate groups of people around this different mindset?
It is a socially self-catalyzing phenomenon that is already clearly underway. There are a huge number of us who are opting out of whatever that engine is that's feeding us a narrative, right? And we've opted into other things that make sense. And it's very frustrating, clearly, to those who are tending the narrative that we won't be dissuaded by their periodic attempts to demonize you or Joe Rogan or whoever it might be. So, in a sense, people are looking for reason, and they are finding people who, at the very least, are not lying to them and trying to figure out where we are in history, what we are to do about it. And I think we can just show up. And the biggest obstacle is that there is a culture of fear around acknowledging your doubts about where we are and about our leadership and about what's really driving all of this. But people have to be emboldened. And I think there are some of us who have stepped out in front of this thing and we've said, this is not adding up. Here's how you know, right? Check our work. And
watch us correct our mistakes when we make them.
Right. And for each of us who has done that in some large venue, there are a lot of people who have stepped up behind us and said, you know what? That does make sense, right? We have large followings of people who are opting out with us. And I think the point is either you have the particular defects of character that cause you to step out first and then discover what it is on the other side that doesn't want that to happen, or you don't. But each tier makes it safe for the next one to step up and say, you know, I don't believe this either. And if we keep doing that, the point is it grows. And, you know, is there a solid 30% that will absolutely double down, you know, until they've exhausted every conceivable mechanism for doing so? Yes, but we don't need that 30%. We know from the Hidden Tribes report that there is this exhausted middle that is huge. And frankly, we don't really care about each other's ideology. It's beside the point. We're so off track that the things we differ over are irrelevant. We need to get back to the basic process of going forward. Well, as you named your party.
Right, exactly. And you were seeing this in effectively the campfires that you were doing. And we were seeing this for 15 years in the classrooms and field trips and labs at Evergreen. You know, we had a non-elite student body. Some of our students were elite, and some of them were veterans, and some of them were grandmothers, and some of them had been homeschooled or unschooled or Montessori schooled, or, you know, any number of kinds of remarkable educational experiences. And they came into our classrooms as a diverse lot of people, 25 or 50 at a time. And we created community by establishing that everyone here is allowed to speak freely and explore ideas and is expected to publicly correct their errors if they discover they have made them, and to never conflate the thing that comes out of your mouth with the fundamental thing that you are as a human being. We don't say, if I disagree with you, I therefore dislike you as a person. That is a conflation that will not be tolerated. And it worked. Like, you know, we were doing this at a very much smaller scale successfully in these actually diverse classrooms for 15 years. And it was amazing. Like, that did bring people together, and it revealed how little actual disagreement people have when they're allowed to speak to each other.
Yep.
You should just do that for the entire country.
How does it scale, right? And I think this is part of what you're trying to do, like figure out how it scales, right?
Well, you know, you say that, Andrew, and in some sense, that's accidentally what we're doing. And it's not even the country, right? It's for anybody with ears to hear. That's what our Dark Horse podcast is about. I will say, when you do that, as you're discovering, there are, you know, the funny thing about the third rail metaphor is that it's not up to date, because there are many different third rails with different amounts of voltage that one has to be concerned about. And the point is, for those who can get past the narrative about, you know, what's wrong with the people they're suddenly listening to, for those who get past that, there's a lot to be done. And what we're doing on our podcast isn't so different from what we did in the classroom. It's in one way different because we don't know our audience in the way that we knew every single one of our students. But in another way, it's the same thing. And it's part of a network of people who are doing variations on that theme. You're clearly in this network with a particular bent. And anyway, I think it's almost the only hopeful thing, but it's so big, you know, this network of people who are opting out and trying to forge the path forward, that it really does give me and us hope.
Well, you all give me hope. And I learned so much in this book about being a better human, husband, partner, parent. May Forward meet the fourth frontier together.
Hell yeah.
We can put your book meets our book.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it. So great to be able to sit down with you all. Everyone should buy their book. It will make you a healthier, wiser, more in touch with your own humanity person. And congratulations on a massive achievement. Reading it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about you and your family, and some of the environments you've been in. But you should be really proud of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
that, Andrew. And glad to find ourselves on the same road.
I hope that this is the first of many conversations, both.
Oh, no doubt. For sure. We'll do it in person at some point.
Great.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.